My dad told me I should be very happy to be earning $100 a week, $125 a week, and to have a house one day in Long Island, and maybe a job at the bank. He was half kidding, but he was also serious, that he was concerned about security, my security. He used to say, "Nobody gets out of here alive," which was later paraphrased by Jim Morrison. He used to say, "Life is no bowl of cherries." When he got out of college in 1931, his most vivid and dramatic memory was, with a Yale education, was turning out as a floor walker, begging for a job as a floor walker at a department store. So it took him a long while to get his feet after college. And I think that profoundly affected him. And he used to tell me that America did not come out of that depression until the Second World War, and that he, being a Roosevelt hater, used to say that Roosevelt got all the credit for getting America out of the Depression, when in fact the war did. So I grew up in a environment of strict conformity, where I used to wear a tie and a shirt and a jacket every day. I lived in New York City. I did not go out on the street without a tie on. You felt naked on the street without a tie in the neighborhoods where I was. On the other hand, life had a very defined stability to it. Everything was done at a certain hour. My father would sit in the bathtub at a certain hour, and I could always go and see him at that hour and talk to him. I felt something was wrong in the 1960s, in the early 60s, but in the 1950s, it was fear and conformity, in getting good grades in school, and trying to grow up without getting into too much trouble, you know. I think smoking cigarettes and maybe being a JD, a juvenile delinquent, was about the level of nonconformity that you could go to. You'd always be terrified of the kids that got kicked out of school, you know, because there'd always be those kids, 2 or 3 of your friends would go, and God, what's going to happen to him, you know, what's going to happen to his life now that he's gone, you know. I went to college at Yale University, and I really, literally had a nervous breakdown without having any of the physical symptoms of one, in that it was suddenly stopped. Nothing was working for me. I couldn't get good grades anymore. I couldn't work. I couldn't study. I couldn't concentrate. I knew something was wrong with my system, mentally, that it was not getting enough out of America, not getting enough out of myself, unhappy. And I said, well, I'm going to take myself out to the Far East, because I've got to find another way. I've got to find another way of living. I remember being particularly influenced by Joseph Conrad's book at that point, Lord Jim, and about sailing the Southeast Asian seas and having that sense of freedom in another life, a second life, so to speak. That's what happened to me. I went out there as a second life in 1965 to teach school to Chinese students, high school students in Saigon, in Cho Lan, Vietnam. I don't know what I was rebelling against. All I knew was that something was wrong, and I had to go find another system, see what the rest of the world was like. I was too young to make value judgments. But I was old enough to know that something was wrong, and that I had to look. I just had to keep my eyes open, and to go out to the Far East and to meet new people and see new things seemed to be the solution. The disillusionment possibly starts with a sense of, I was one of the first kids to leave college. That didn't start till '68, but I think it starts with that sense of the lonely crowd, David Reisman book, a sense of conformity. Am I growing to Yale University in order to turn into another tie and a suit on Wall Street, to be a banker, to be another member of Skull and Bones or the CIA, you know? I mean, am I going to be part of that assembly line of American leaders and lawyers and white-collar people? I looked at them. I saw the result through my father. I used to go to Washington and New York and see the result of the system, and I think I was questioning it. I wasn't sure what I could replace it with. Oh boy, those next 10 years are like, you're talking about a roller coaster ride through adolescent hell. I think that you see a lot of those feelings reflected in Born on the 4th of July and in Platoon, if you look closely. And in fact, I think if you look at my movie Wall Street, you'll see a kid that, if I had ever stayed at college and gone to Wall Street, I might have, had some of those problems that Charlie did, Sheen. I think, I went to Nam as a soldier eventually in '67, '68. And I saw things that just shocked me, opened my eyes. I'd never be the same again. Combat is a searing experience, and devastating to what your sense of life is worth and your sense of self. You have no illusions about yourself or what life comes down to. It comes to a very basic thing: survival and killing. And you see a lot of ugliness in your fellow man and young people. I mean, it's a very genetic kind of thing. It just is breeded. It's an inbred thing. I try to deal with that in Platoon, where at the lowest level you see a certain type of man that's going to go a certain kind of way in a pressure situation, and other types of men are going to do better things, I think, morally better. So I got an eyeful of that at about 19 and 20. I came back, and I guess I was like the Tom Cruise character in Bourne, in that I was not ready to condemn the war effort, but I certainly, things were not working in sync. My head and my heart were telling me two different things. My head was saying, yes, support the government, support the troops, support your flag. And my heart, my body language is telling me something was wrong over there. I don't believe what I saw. I don't think we were doing the right thing. I think we were hurting people. And I think that we were hurting ourselves a lot. And so I came back to a very conflicted inner state, and I went through years of questioning and alienation and doubts and personal problems. I went to jail at one point in America, 10 days after I got back from the Vietnam War, for marijuana, which was another eye-opener, because here in the jails I saw another underclass of kids that I just left in Vietnam that were in jail without any really hopes of freedom. I was lucky enough to end up at film school and got the GI Bill and made short films, and that in a sense took some of the pressure off of me that, so many Vietnam veterans have been screwed up, as you know. Maybe, they say, I don't know the numbers, but, maybe more than 60,000 have died since the war, in addition to the 60,000 dead over there. We're talking about suicides, we're talking about alcohol-related car accidents and drug-related accidents. We're talking about despair and symptoms of syndromes of distress. I came back to a situation where my generation, the kids I knew, were all prospering. Because Johnson, in that war period, the inflation took this country like a steamroller and just shot up the value of the dollar. I mean, what a dollar could buy in 65 and what it could buy in 68 was tremendously different. And inflation was raging. People were making money. My friends were doing well. I came back to a situation where I was not encountering hostility to my involvement over there. I was encountering complete indifference. It was like, oh, you were over there? You dropped out for a year to go over there? What a waste of time. It's too bad. Welcome back. Let's get on with your life. But you can't just come back and get back into that beat. You're off a beat when you come back from war. You're off a beat, and you just don't look at people the same way. You don't relate to them the same way. You don't have friends. You don't have friends, and you don't trust your family, because your family doesn't get it. My dad never got Vietnam. He thought it was a police action. I remember he told me, I've been wounded twice, and he said, well, that's not really a war like the war I was in. And he said, it was a police action, which hurt me. You don't trust anybody. And then eventually you get to the point where you don't trust your government anymore. The Pentagon Papers came out. It was disgusting what was in those papers. The whole, Johnson fabricated the whole Vietnam War with the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. They stampeded the Senate and the House into a war that was never declared. He sends half the country to fight it. He lets the rich go. It's a completely insane way. You're dividing the country. You're putting civil war into the country. He did what Lincoln did 100 years before, but he did it for the wrong reasons. Johnson made a civil war in this country. Given all those factors, I'm amazed it took me so long to realize what the hell was going on. I guess I'm stupider or slower or a later developer than the rest. But I guess it took me to about 1971 to kind of say, hey, something is very wrong. The government is telling a lie. The government is a lie. Never trust your government again, blindly. Well, you see, when you first go over and you're doing it, you're serving it, you're putting your blood on the line, and these are the kids that are not, that are getting college deferments, there's a natural resentment. You know, who are they? Let them, if they're going to protest, let them do it in a more, like, let them join the Army and be conscientious objectors. Let them do it from the inside. Let them take a stand, or let them go to Canada. At least let them stand for something. But there was something sort of hypocritical about, you know, being able to avoid the war, condemning the system, and going to college at the same time to avoid all of the moral choices that your decision brought about. So, yeah, it seemed like an easy out. That's why I suppose at that time, 67 and 68, I had contempt for them. In hindsight, that changed. If I probably would have done the same thing. I probably would have gone to college because I knew what war is like. I don't want to avoid it. And I would probably protest because that's the best thing I could do. And say something without, you know, that's the best I could have done without completely screwing up my life. I heard some of the music in Vietnam. I heard the Chambers Brothers, and I heard the Doors. I heard the Beatles. I'd grown up, as I told you earlier, in a more conformist society in the 50s and the early 60s where you wore a tie and a shirt. To suddenly see girls and boys completely naked, taking their clothes off, or even wearing these outrageous clothes, was quite a shock to me. And I said, how do they, you know, I'd never have the courage to do that. I would never look to try to stand out in a crowd, you know, with long hair. My father had always sort of taught me, a man, you know, a woman should stand out, should look good, but a man should never stand out. You know, he should be anonymous. Which is part of the reason you go to the Army, to sort of be anonymous, to sort of not have an identity, to be part of a social fabric. That there's a strange strength in that, you know, to be one of a group, a collective, which I suppose is true about some of the hippie movement too. In their own way, they were joining a collective and being anonymous in their own way. But it struck me as very, at that time, it struck me as very individualistic, and I said I never understood the motivation. The girls were very pretty, and you know, the old thing about at that point in time, some of the girls were saying that we would never have sex with soldiers because, you know, they're the war machine, and they were going to deny sex to the military. And that was an interesting, I thought, concept of sort of Lysistrata, you know, that, and in fact, they were right. I mean, if all the mothers in America had declared war on the Pentagon, then they could have prevented it. If all the mothers had spoken out as mothers to protect their sons, it would not have happened the way it did. The hippies, to me, you know, I came to understand after the war what they were. The music that got me first. The music was the black music is what worked, because there was a lot of black troops in Vietnam, so they were playing Temptations and Smokey Robinson and stuff you saw in Platoon, you know, and that gets to your unconscious very quickly. It's interesting, that dichotomy in Vietnam between the guys who listened to country music, of which there were many. They had a very I would say a more hawkish point of view, whereas those boys who listened more to the soul music had a different point of view, and there was more like, hey man, I'm just going to take the Cassius Clay attitude, the Muhammad Ali attitude of, I got no beef with the Viet Cong. I'm going to get out of here. They were cooler, and we went through the villages. I found that those type of people would treat the villagers a little better than some of the people who listened to some of the country music who'd kick some ass. I think the music got to me first, the spirit of intoxication. And when I came back to the States, I started to do more and more grass. So, of course, you know, the grass mellows you out, and you start to be less rigid in your thinking, less judgmental. You don't see categories the same way. I became much more tolerant. And I think what was nice about the hippie movement to me in those years was the sense of there was no fear. They really didn't operate out of fear like I did in Vietnam. I mean, I had to lose that fear. There was no sense of danger to life. There was no dealing with death. It was everything was there to be had. It was abundant. The world was in abundance. The world was to be loved. The concept of love is a public phenomena. The mention of love in a public way, be outside of the church. This was the first I heard of it. You know, love, peace, man. You know, the love and peace. That was the refrain. The concept was that life was there to be experienced fully, to experience everything. Have no fear, make no plans, make no career plans. Test and enjoy the limits of life.
Sounds pretty good.
It's hard for a Vietnam veteran to come back to that situation because you're racked with fear, you're racked with paranoia, with death on your mind. For me to make that transition to seeing Hair, the musical, or Jesus Christ Superstar, and trying to relate to that generation, my generation, was very difficult, and I never felt like I was with them. I could never be a hippie. Just there was a gulf, but that doesn't to say that I didn't smoke as much dope as they ever did, or take as many acid trips, because I did, and I had my own series of experiences, but I never considered myself in the mainstream of the hippie movement. You're talking about adolescence. I think everything happens that's exciting in our lives from the age of probably 14 to 24, you know. That's the playground where so much is decided. I came from being a Republican, young Republican type conformist, not really knowing what I was thinking or why I was thinking it, but parodying sort of a party line, to being an anarchic, creatively anarchic, independent, free thinker, doubting everything by the end of the 60s, doubting the systems that I had learned about in the 50s, but not yet knowing how to live my life quite, and wrestling with many doubts and much internal warfare. You see, I don't ascribe to the media aspect of the 60s being this defined era. It's about our generation in the sense that we were born in the 40s, and it's a process that's been ongoing. So the 60s just melted in the 70s, the 70s and the 80s, and now into the 90s. But we're accumulating, we're absorbing all that information still, and we're reflecting back now some of our 60s values. They didn't disappear. There was no dramatic bombing of an airport that ended the 60s. I don't ascribe to Altamont being the end of the 60s, because there was some fighting and ugliness, and people were taking too many drugs, and there's no question that abuse and self-indulgence did set in. But that didn't make drugs bad. Drugs were, people forget in this simplistic times that drugs were there to expand our minds, and we took them to expand our minds, and in many cases it worked. Our minds did get a little better. We started something. We questioned things, and we must never say that it was a loss or a failure or that it stopped. I see it as an ongoing phenomena. I would not be the person I am if it hadn't been for the 60s. And I'm still using that information in the 90s. And I hope, among other things, not only to celebrate the 60s with this movie, but to pass on, like DNA, some of that information to the kids that are growing up in the 90s. They should have it. It was a good time. It was a time when we were not scared. It was a time when we believed in the possibility of all things. We believed in love as a concept. We believed in experiencing all of life. That innocence is wonderful and should always be there. It should not just disappear with age, and we mustn't become world weary. We become tired as we get older. We become more jaded. Yes, that's a part of life too. But threaded in there, it should be that innocence. Politically, we must get smart. We must evolve towards a planetary consciousness with the environment, etc. On the other hand, I have this perennial fear of the old Jane Goodall theory about the apes, that the old alpha ape is up there in us, somewhere in our brain. This dinosaur brain keeps emerging, and we need enemies. We need enemies, and if we don't have one, we invent one. Certainly the Oliver Norths of this world do that, and so do many of the people in politics, the people who have the power. And that's a war that's going to go on for into the turn of the new century. My kid's going to face that war. Is America going to become a third world policeman? Are we going to be intervening in numerous border wars, trying to protect our ideology from perceived threats? Or are we going to become more like a Japan, Switzerland, or Sweden, or a European country that through its past experiences of suffering and pain and wisdom will accept other ideologies, accept other ways of life, and go on about its business, which I've always think America has a good business. It's business. We're good at it. We're not great warriors. We're good businessmen. So I think America should do that.